Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about the spread of Camellia sinensis, or the popularity of Camellia sinensis, and how it's an amazing thing and why. Why did it spread through every corner of the planet to the point where tea is the most consumed beverage in the world aside from water, and how this is quite stunning and miraculous. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, come by the tea store. Also, subscribe and hit the notification bell and share with others if you haven't done so already. Also, post a comment. Right now I'm drinking my multivitamin, the Ginger Pure Green. Camellia sinensis, the plant from which tea hails. I think we forget the history of this thing. I think many people, especially if you're just a casual tea drinker, you just think, oh, tea grows everywhere in the world. Oh, it's easy to produce it. Oh, it's just always been around. It's always been around in Europe and Africa and America and China and Japan. And then some people might know, well, it hails natively from East Asia. But let's remember, and I think a great analogy, and I don't mean to offend those who are not religious, is the spreading of Christianity. You think of when Christ died in the Holy Land, today's Holy Land. He had disciples, he had the 12 apostles, he had disciples around that, but it was very small, very, very small. And then you see how it spread from that very small cadre, nucleus, core, to eventually, as he mentioned, to every corner of the planet. He mentions on the end of Matthew that he'll be with you, he'll be with us until everywhere, and we're supposed to go to every corner of the planet to preach his word. And I think we take that for granted. And you could say that about other religions, like Islam is in every corner of the planet, but it's more, I think, regional than Christianity, which literally it's in every corner of this planet. And I think we kind of take that for granted. We don't even think, like, how did something like Christianity go from a very small group of people to literally, look at the Catholic Church is 1.2 billion people. You look at overall Christians, including the Catholics and Orthodox, it is something close to 2.5 billion people. And so there's a lot of similarities with that in tea. So tea, Camellia sinensis, is really native to the Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle is going to be southern China, Assam, which is eastern India, and then northern part of Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. That is where Camellia sinensis started originally. And from there, it spread. So this goes to the history of tea playlist that we have here, but just a quick review. So southern China had it, and if you look at really when we started having documented writings of tea was really in the Han period about 2,000 years ago, around the time of Christ. And then you see how it spread from southern China. You think of Yunnan, that area, kind of where pu'er is famous. And then it started to spread, and it spread through China proper, where people were drinking it. Certainly by the time of Christ, people were drinking it. Now, how they drank it back then was different. It was seen more as a medicinal brew. And then as we went from 1 AD, time of Christ, to the Ming Dynasty, went through different iterations. There was a time where everybody was drinking compressed tea, like brick teas. There was a time where everyone was doing it matcha. It was a powdered. And then eventually with the Ming Dynasty in the 1600s, it became promulgated that you had to do loose leaf tea. But either way, around the time of Christ, even by that point, aside from going to China proper, the tea trails were already started, the tea horse trails, and the tea horse trails were to Tibet. So the popularity of tea was partly because when people would drink it, they're like, this is amazing, it makes me feel amazing. And so it spread through China proper, which was civilization, very advanced civilization. But then the neighboring people were like, oh, we've heard about this. Oh, we've done some trading, some bartering. And so Tibet at that time was pretty modern and advanced, and that was one of the first civilizations that started to drink tea. And then you saw like Chinese princesses were married off to the Tibetan leaders, and so tea went over there, similar to how Catherine of Braganza from Portugal married Charles II of England, and she brought that tea culture to England in the 1660s, and that's what caused tea to really catch on over there. So you see that tea got to Tibet, then tea eventually went to Mongolia, and then later on, because again, the popularity of tea, Buddhist monks brought tea from China, where it was grown natively. They got cuttings, and they brought it to where? Korea, Vietnam, and most famously, Japan. And so you see it's spreading and spreading. And around this time, you look at some of the writings, probably the most famous one, the Cha Ching, the classic of tea written by Lu Yu, how he's writing this, 700 AD, about tea, how to brew it and why it's great. And so before we continue as how it spread and how it was popularized, but why is tea the most consumed beverage in the world? Why? Because it tastes amazing, whether it be green, black, white, whatever it is, but also the cognitive, the medicinal, right? The energy, the caffeine. All these things Lu Yu was writing about 1,300 years ago in the classic of tea. So I think sometimes we just kind of take for granted, like, yeah, tea's everywhere. But why? Because it tastes amazing, but people were recognizing, and even in ancient times, the medicinal benefits of it. Now, they couldn't tell you that it was full of polyphenols and catechins, and it was full of theanine and all these things. They couldn't tell you that, but they kind of knew intuitively when they drank it, like, oh, this is amazing. So you see tea by the 1600s, pretty much everybody in this area of the world, whether it be Assam, Vietnam, Thailand, China, Japan, Korea, Tibet. Then what happened? Age of exploration. And so you see around the 1600s, the Portuguese come, the Dutch come around Africa. They start drinking this thing called cha or tea, depending on what port they got it from. We have an episode on why it's in some places tea is called tea, in some places it's called cha. And then they start shipping it back. And look, it could have been like a lot of herbs that people try and you never hear from again, that people drink it, that they're not popular. Maybe it could have tasted crappily. Maybe people just didn't pick up on it. But as soon as Europe got a hold of tea, it was like crack cocaine, for lack of a better word. In the late 1600s, you started seeing tea houses open up in the Netherlands. The Dutch were really the first ones to bring it around and then sell it to England and other places. You saw tea houses open up in England around the same time that coffee houses were opening. And then you also see the camel caravan. So in the 1600s, Russia was bordering China, and part of a tea treaty was that the Chinese emperor gave the Tsar, Michael, some tea. And he's like, oh, this is amazing. And that's how they got hold of tea. And so the camel caravan started. We've talked about that on What's Russian Tea episode. So camels would go from China proper through Inner Mongolia, then Mongolia to Siberia, and then the camels would go through Siberia to Moscow, and this would take several months. And you saw the camel caravans do this from the late 1600s to the mid 1800s, when the Trans-Siberian, or later 1800s, I should say, when the Trans-Siberian Railroad came in, and then the camels, sadly, were no longer needed. But Russia was really the first country that really picked up on tea. And so you see the European countries picking up on tea. They're loving it. Go to the 4-part series we did on how tea, the East India Company, stole tea from China because there was such a voracious market for Camellia sinensis. And then from there, the same way that tea, the same mechanism of delivery that brought tea to Europe, then took it from Europe to the colonies. And so you see the popularity of tea in the American colonies. We think of the Boston Tea Party, but America, per capita, the colonies were drinking more tea than in Europe, than in England. They were hooked on this stuff. And even after the Boston Tea Party, they kept drinking it. They were drinking coffee as well, but they kept drinking tea. And we're going to have a future episode on what happened. Why did eventually coffee become more popular in America, like in the 1920s, than tea? But up into the 1920s, tea and coffee were neck and neck. And so wherever tea is exposed to people drink Camellia sinensis. And I think we forget that. And the same thing with a good example of Christianity. I think we just forget this and we take it for granted. That tea is the most consumed beverage in the world, aside from water. It easily eclipses coffee and easily eclipses soda or anything else. And I think here in the West, we don't see that because coffee is preponderant. Alcohol is preponderant. Tea is not. We've talked in earlier episodes how tea is seen in certain parts of America as an effeminate drink. But if you ever travel, like people in the military, a lot of people come in to the tea shop, or former military, they'll tell you, and they have a taste for tea because where? They were shipped to Japan. They were shipped to China. They were shipped to Taiwan, or in their travels, they went to India, they went to the Middle East, they went to these places where tea is just part of their way of life. It is part of their ethos. And you have to step back and think, why is tea part of their ethos? It just didn't happen. It's just not like the tea leaf dropped from the sky, even that's one of the most famous legends as to how tea became to be consumed. It just fell into all hot boiling water of a Chinese emperor in the Bronze Age. But it's not like it just came from the sky and it's just like we've always been drinking it. No. What happened was everybody who drinks tea, every culture who drinks Camellia sinensis loves it, and because of that, it is spread to every corner of the planet. Yes, there's going to be certain parts of the planet that drink more tea than other parts of the planet. We have an episode here why Latin America, for example, doesn't drink as much tea historically as other parts of the world. But tea has spread because it tastes good, but just as tantamount and equal to that is, we all know when you drink it, the cognitive changes, the health benefits, and all these things are just as equal to the taste. And so we are blessed, and I've mentioned this in a past episode, we are blessed to live when we live right now. Maybe in some other ways we're not blessed to live in 2024, 2025 America, but we are blessed to live as tea lovers in this time. Because you think of our European ancestors of any century, but let's say it's 1700s, they had to wait months to get tea shipped to them, and a lot of that tea was stale. And now we live at a time where we can get the best teas or the worst teas, any category of tea, any cultivar of tea shipped to us pretty quickly, and we're just very blessed to have this divine drink. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless.